Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. I didn't want to say it because it makes it real. Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. The Murder of Angela Owens Wooldridge, Part 1 of 3. Hello, I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
Welcome back to the Murder Police Podcast.
Well, today, Wendy, we've got a particularly difficult case to talk about. And it's difficult because it obviously involves a very good friend of yours and someone that I came to know very well and came to carry a lot about through you. And this is going to be a rough ride for us, but I think it bears talking about for a couple of reasons. I believe that Angela really needs to be memorialized for eternity as a victim of a crime and a friend of yours. And I think it also highlights some of the dangers of domestic violence that we've talked about in other cases before, but unfortunately, this time it came way too close to home. Tell me who Angela is, and maybe did she have any of previous married names or maiden names? Because people listening in the audience may know her through some of these other names, and this might help them identify who they're listening about. Tell me her names through some of the relationships that she's had.
Well, she was born Angela Gail Owens on June 6, 1973. She married as a 19-year-old, and she became Angela Kelm. And she was married for several years, and then later remarried and became Angela Hobbs, and was Hobbs for quite a while until her most recent marriage when she became Angela Wooldridge.
And just how old was Angie when we lost her?
She was 48. She would have been 49 on June 3rd.
Where was Angie from that you know of? Where was she maybe born and did most of her growing up at?
Well, she was born in Casey County, Kentucky, also known as Liberty, Kentucky. And she moved to Nicholasville in 4th grade and stayed here ever since.
Gotcha. And I guess down in Casey County when she grew up with her family and whatnot, is she survived by her parents?
Her mother, unfortunately, passed away several years back from cancer. She had a pretty rough battle with cancer. That was pretty tough on Angie and the family. She is survived by her father, and she has one sister. And she has 3 biological children and 2 adopted children.
Tell me about the biological children. What's their age ranges?
The 2 boys are from her first marriage. They're adult young men. And then she has a daughter who's 15. And her 2 adopted children, she fostered. She loved fostering children. That's something she and I started together, was foster parent classes. And she fostered many children and ultimately ended up adopting 2 of them that she had fostered since birth. They were not biological siblings, but a year apart. Got them both from birth, from the hospital, actually, and adopted them once their parental rights were terminated from their biological parents, and she had them ever since birth.
So listening to that, I can assume that at the time of her death that she just had the 3 younger ones living with her, correct?
She did, yes. The 15-year-old and then the 2 younger ones that are in elementary school. On actually the date of Angela's death, they were celebrating the youngest one's birthday. It was his 7th birthday party.
How sad. Now, I know a lot of what I knew from Angie meeting her through you, and I've got just nothing but positive impressions of who she was. And just at her, she just had an infectious smile, a really neat laugh, if I remember correctly.
She did. Yes, she did.
Tell me about the things about her that you knew about her personality-wise.
I made a memorial tribute to her on my Facebook post, and it's so true. We often joked that we didn't have any friends because, I don't know, either we were too mean or too ornery, so we just had each other. And, people say they have a circle of friends, and Angie and I always said we didn't have a circle. We just had a straight line, and it was her at one end and me at the other, and that's as far as it went. And like I said also, if Angie didn't like you, I just didn't like you either, and I didn't even need a reason why. I just didn't, because she didn't. Same thing with me. All she needed to know is I didn't like you, and so she didn't either. She was the kind of friend that no matter what you were doing, she was just there. You called, she was there. You needed advice, she was there. She just was always there for me, and me, her. We laughed, we cried, we just been through so many things, and we met at such a young age, so we really grew up together.
Yeah, that's what I understand from talking to you too, is that just how long y'all had been. How many years do you think you all knew each other?
31. We met back in 1991. We started working together, and that's how we met.
Where were y'all working together?
We worked at Long John's corporate office. We worked in the payroll department. She had started there about a month before I did, and we were cubicle mates. And when I started working there, our supervisor placed me in with her, and she trained me, and our birthdays were just a few days apart, so we always had that in common, and we said we were Gemini twins. And you think, I tell you often, you're my soulmate, and I do believe that, but Angie was my friend's soulmate. If I was thinking it, I didn't even have to say it. She just knew. Or same thing with her. I'd say, I know what you're thinking. Don't even tell me what you're getting ready to do. And it was that kind of friendship. But we met there, and we were young. She was 19. Maybe she wasn't yet 19. And I was a year older. There's a year between us. Little special things, like we would always celebrate the birthday month at the corporate office we worked at Long John's corporate. And so we would always have our birthdays together, because mine's May 30, hers is June 3rd. And so it was just always close-knit things like that, eating lunches together and helping her plan her first wedding, and going through when she was trying to conceive her first child, the pregnancy test that kept being negative until the positive one finally came, and we celebrated that too. There was just so many things with her. It was just a daily life with her. She was there every day. And on weekends when we weren't working, we were still talking, or we were together.
Do you remember any hobbies or interests or things that she was passionate about or that drew her in, and maybe things that you all shared too?
Oh, true crime. We always shared that. When we first met, there wasn't true crime documentaries back in the early 90s. But true crime, geez, she and I both initially, when I had the interest to go into the police academy, she did as well. And she took all the tests and started doing the training, and then she had a plantar fasciitis tear in her foot, and so she had to stop. So we both kind of got into the crime thing then, and then once the shows came out, it was so funny because so many nights when you were gone, like you are sometimes with your teaching, she would call and say, have you seen this episode of this particular show? And I'd say, no. And she'd say, oh gosh, girl, go to your Roku right now. Okay, go down to episode 3. It's in season 2. Episode 3, season 2. And she'd say, you have got to watch that. When you get to the 19-minute marker, call me back. And so it was just things like that we shared together. We both had such a passion for the true crime and such an interest in it. But aside of that, she just loved babies. She loved her foster babies. And every one of them, they were hers. She just loved them like they were all hers. And I told her, I said, geez, you're going to start collecting kids if you aren't careful. And she said, I know, I want a house full of them. Kids and cats. She loved kids and cats. And
that reminded me of, I think, one time that she had seen an episode on one of those shows about some inmates arguing over a cookie. And,
it was the funniest thing. And I can't remember, and I'll tell this because you and I still joke about it. And there's another one that that I'll share, and I'm not going to share where she got it from. It was a guy that she was dating. But two of the infamous things that we still say, you and I, and she and I would always say, yeah, the inmates, they were arguing, and they had gotten into a fight in the cafeteria, I guess. They both got put in the hole. The one inmate they were interviewing, they asked him about the fight, and he said that the guy had accused him of taking his cookie. The guy said, I didn't take his cookie. What do I want with his child-sized cookie? And so that was always a joke. Anytime we mentioned something to demean it, we would always say, we didn't want your child-sized cookie. And it was just hilarious because we had those certain things that we would say that really nobody knew what we were talking about. But to us, it was hilarious.
Yeah, I remember that one because I think you asked me on her behalf one time if they would argue over a cookie in prison. I said, absolutely.
Yeah, and then I think you said, and to demean it even more, he had to downgrade it and make it a child-sized
cookie.
It wasn't even a good cookie. Yeah. It was a child-sized cookie.
Yeah, economies in prison are really limited, and so cookies are a big deal probably. I'm laughing about that because I still just remember that. And you're right, we still talk about it.
Yeah, and she had that voice. She mocked the voice when she did it. The other thing that's so funny is a person that she had dated, he was always a one-upper. Anything that you had done, he'd already either done it or did it 10 times better than you. He was working for a cleaning service, and she said, geez, he's trying to make it sound like he's, even though he's working for a cleaning service, he isn't just cleaning regular office buildings and regular apartments. They're luxury apartments and office buildings. So, she said they aren't basic. So anytime something was average, she'd say, girl, it's not basic, it's luxury. And she would always capitalize if we were texting the LUX and then put the URY in the little letters after that. So that was always something that we laughed about, something being luxury or basic.
And, you talked, too, about being that close to her, which I think people understand the difference between somebody they know and somebody that is a real friend. And you described it as maybe a soul friend or whatever, is that, I think we both told the kids. I know I've told Brooke when she was growing up, my daughter, and I know we've had this conversation with Jasper, my stepson, is that you're always going to have like lots of associations. Lots of people that you meet.
Yeah, acquaintances.
Acquaintances, yeah, exactly. But you'll always count on fewer than all the fingers on your hand on the people that are actually friends.
Yeah, I just had her. That was it. And you're right. There are people that, yeah, you call them your friend. You like them. But are they a friend that you call at 3 a.m. and they're going to drop what they're doing and come get you? Are they that kind of friend, or are they just going to call you the next day and say, I missed your call? But Angie and I, we were the kinds of friends that we would be there for each other if one of us had, not to air too much business, but, abnormal pap smears even, or mammograms. We were there for each other. We would go to those gynecology appointments together or go to the mammograms together because I would share and she would share the anxieties that we would both have over abnormal results. And so we didn't go that alone. She took off work many of occasions to go on appointments with me. And I think you recall when I had a hernia removed 2 years ago, she took off work that day and she went to the hospital and drove me there. And you came a little bit later. And I did that with her gastric bypass surgery. I told work that I wouldn't be in. And you recall I stayed all night at the hospital with her. So that's just what we did. You didn't think about it. You just did it.
So you went through all that together. How much contact do you think you would have, like, during a week, or were you contacting at one point daily when you all were friends?
Oh, it was multiple times a day. Half the time we would sit on the phone together while she was working. Of course, with what I do, it's hard for me to sit on the phone. If I was home working that day, we would just talk the majority of the day, or I'd call in the morning and she would kind of joke and say, yeah, I've got a low day, girl. I'm going to be able to sit here and balance my checkbook all day long. And so we would just talk. She'd keep her earbuds in, and the majority of the work day we would spend on the phone. And I don't want her work people as of late to think she did that. She didn't at her last job. But in the past, we did. And even at her last job, on the rides in, we would be on the phone. As soon as she'd drop her children off to school or daycare, she'd be calling, and we would talk up until she's getting into an elevator or I'm walking into my building. Same thing in the afternoons. We would talk on the way home until she's picking hers up from daycare and I'm walking in the door here. And as you know, half the time I would still be on the phone talking to her while I'm preparing dinner. It was just every day. It wasn't on occasion. And when it was every day, it was either all day or multiple times a day.
And I witnessed that. And that's why I asked that. That changed at some point.
It did.
It did. And let's move into that a little bit. And I know it might get a little more difficult at this point too, because I think we both know, and I think what's important for the listeners to understand is the reason it changed, it had a lot to do with this husband that she was married to.
It did.
When she died.
It had everything to do with that.
Well, let's kind of, first of all, we won't be naming him for a couple of reasons. I mean, we probably have pretty strong opinions about what he did, obviously, because he killed her. But there's another thing, too, about this. A couple of things is that, one, this is about Angie. This is about her as a crime victim, which is what we uplift in this show. And then thirdly is just as important is that regardless of how we feel about that, he has a family that is wrestling with this in equally horrible ways too. And that may be hard for people to swallow, but at some point you have to respect the fact that he's got family and friends that are grieving in incredible ways that are magnified based on everything that happened. So we won't be naming him for those reasons, but we'll just refer to him as her last husband or him, and we'll leave it at that. As far as he goes, when did they meet? Can you recall?
Yeah, I recall very much because she called me and told me that she had encountered him, wanted me to go with her on her first meeting. I did. I think you recall that night she and I had gone to the gym to work out. We were working out every night. Our goal was once she hit her 100-pound weight loss, we were going to Jamaica, and we'd been working out every day. And on this particular day, I remember we worked out and I said, "Are you going to go home and shower before you meet him?" And she said, "No, I want him to see me how I am, and we'll see how he tolerates this. Maybe there won't even be a first real date." And so we went and worked out, and I was driving. I remember we left her car at the gym, and I drove us to his work. I was there for the first, quote, date, if you will. I guess meeting, we'll call it.
Well, you were the wing woman.
I was.
A guy would have a wingman. And let me take you back to something, because there's been two things you mentioned that I think are incredibly important to talk about. How happy she was in that moment. You had mentioned before that she'd had gastric bypass, and then you just now talked about how she had lost 100 pounds, which I still remember that too.
Oh, she was so tickled. Every Tuesday was her weigh-in, and she'd call me every Tuesday morning, and we'd do it on the phone together. "Girl, I'm getting ready to step on the scales. Are you ready?" Excuse my language. I know we try to keep it clean here, but we always had a funny saying that we would have when you get real nervous. And she would call it shit gut. And then we decided that spicy pits were a thing too when you're super nervous. So if you had shit gut and spicy pits, you were really worked up over something that was getting ready to happen. So every Tuesday she'd say, "Girl, I got shit gut. I hope I lost pound. I hope I lost all the weight I wanted to lose." So we would be on the phone while she stepped on the scale. And, and then inevitably she would take a picture of the number, even though we're on the phone, and text it to me. So every Tuesday was a celebration day because she'd lose more weight. And we would meal plan for her together over the phone, what she's going to eat. So I went through that whole journey with her, literally from going into the hospital with her the night before.
And that's what I remember too, is that the closer she got, and then when she hit that mark, she was elated.
Oh, she was ecstatic.
And you had to be proud with her and of her because it took so much work, and she glowed.
She felt so great about herself.
And Angie was always a beautiful woman.
Oh,
and we're going to put a lot of pictures of her to memorialize her on the show notes of the website so people can know who we're talking about. But there was something about that, I think, that pride and that elation and the reward for all that work that I had to step back and talk about that because it struck me as something that I recall.
Yeah, she worked so hard to reach that goal. And whether she was heavy, and when I met her, she was heavy, and I didn't care. She was still my Angie. And, when you've got that person that you love, you don't care if they're heavy, skinny, it doesn't matter. So I loved her regardless. She was my Angie. I take her skinny, I take her heavy. I didn't care. She was my friend.
Well, let's go back to when you were the third wheel on this first meeting and everything. During that first meeting, did you get any first impressions about who he was? Was there anything about him that jumped out at you?
I did. I didn't like him from the first meeting. We got there, and of course, he had seen her pictures. They texted pictures back and forth. So he knew who was who. And so he wanted to know. He kind of looked at me with a little smug kind of look on his face and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here with her. We're here for our first meeting." And he said, "Well, I thought I was meeting her." And I said, "No, you're meeting both of us. We're a package deal. You get her, you get me. And I'll decide if there's a first real date." And he didn't like that.
Oh, wow. Now, in the time after that evening and when you talked and everything, did she start to develop any first impressions? Where was she at with this?
I think with Angie, she was so hungry for somebody to love her. And she had been through a lot of relationships that weren't great. She had a heart of gold, and she wanted someone to love her like she loved others. And I think their messaging back and forth and their phone calls back and forth before the meeting, he was telling her things that she wanted to hear. So she had already set up in her mind that he was somebody she was really interested in. And he was taller than her. She liked taller guys. She liked hefty guys. She liked broad shoulders. And he had those things. So for her, the outward appearance, he checkmarked off everything she was looking for. And with him in the background telling her what she wanted to hear, that checked those boxes off as well. So she was giddy, like a elementary school puppy love giddy. And I wasn't.
Did y'all ever talk about it? Because I know that's a risky thing to do with a friend, but did you talk about it, and when did you talk about it?
We did. We joked because I said, "I don't think he likes me, and I really don't care," because she knows that I really don't care about what people think, and she didn't either. She goes, "No, girl, he'll come around. He'll come around. He's just going to have to learn that you're here. You aren't going nowhere. He can either like it or lump it." And I said, "I think he's probably going to lump it." And so we just laughed about it, it wasn't a lecture because we had just met him. So we just kind of chuckled and blew it off. And then that night when he got off work, he called her. And I know this because the next morning I said, "Did you hear from him or did I run him off?" She goes, "No, girl, he's done called. I got him eating out of the palm of my hand already." So that's kind of how it started.
Now, what kind of pace did the relationship move at? Was there anything about that got your attention?
Oh, I would say Lamborghini going down a straight stretch. It was fast, really fast. They started dating after that night, and they had their, first dates like you have. And then he knew that we had this trip coming up, and she told me he's not happy about this trip. And I said, "Well, he's going to have to get over it because we're going." He and she had some words over it. But to answer your question, before we went on this trip, as you know, you were there, he messaged me. He didn't know her. This is how little he knew her. He messaged me to ask me who some of her friends were. And I said, "Well, you're talking to the only one she has. She has acquaintances, if that's what you're meaning." And he said, "Yeah, I'm wanting to have a birthday party for her." He said, "I want you to help me with these people's names." So I threw some names out. As you remember, we had it at a restaurant here in Lexington called Palmer's. You and I got there first with a couple of other of her friends, moms that their kids go to the same dance school that her children or her daughter went to, a neighbor, a couple, just some friends, acquaintances. He told me prior to that, and I think you remember seeing the look on my face, he told me he was going to ask her to marry him that night. And I had the shit gut and spicy pits because we're talking just a month in, 1 month. So this was in June. He asked her. They met in May.
I still remember going to that. I still remember. And I still remember when you told me, I think I was taken back a little bit too. We joked a little bit about it because we joke about fast engagements, obviously, because we didn't. We did not. We had a 5-year engagement. But anyway, getting on with this is that we talked a little bit about that, and I think universally we were like, "That's pretty fast. That's pretty fast." And maybe looking back now, that might even been something that now means more than ever, if that makes any sense when we start looking at all the pieces. And
It
everything.
does, because I'm sorry, even if you talk to your new person every day, you just don't know them in a month. I mean, you don't. I'm sorry to those of you out there that also have puppy love, but you don't know somebody in a month.
Well, let me ask you this too, is that you said that you all had so much contact. Did the contact start to change, or did anything start to change during the courtship, even moving up to the engagement? And then how long after, well, let's get to this. How long after the engagement were they married?
Well, let me say this. At that point, no, the conversation we didn't slow down at that point. We still kept our usual. Now, if she was going to see him, she'd say, I'm about to pull up. I'll call you back when I'm done. And literally she'd say, girl, I'm getting in the car. And I'd hear her turn it on. That's how she literally would call as soon as she's in the car. So no, we still talked very regular at that dating point.
How soon after they were engaged did they actually get married? And I'm asking you these questions, but people need to understand too that we were at the wedding.
It was just the four of us.
Exactly.
And you took the pictures.
Right. I was the photographer. So remind me again, from engagement to wedding day, how much time do you think that was?
1 month.
Yeah. A month.
It was 1 month. Nobody knew about it. I mean, nobody knew. As you know, she and I went to look at a couple of venues, and she ultimately settled on one of our favorite little spots. I guess I should give a shout out to Snug Hollow. It's a wonderful little spot.
For sure. Yeah.
A wonderful lady runs that. It's just, if you're a local, it's divine. It's called Snug Hollow. And we shared that with her as well, or I did, as well as Shaker Village, which is where you and I got married. We toyed with those two places, and ultimately she wanted Snug Hollow because you can stay overnight at Shaker as well. But she really liked what they had to say at Snug Hollow, and everything that she could get there, she fell in love with the place. So it was a month, just 1 month.
In the time of this, okay, now you got the engagement, and then about a month into the wedding or anything, was there anybody close to her besides you that was kind of raising an eyebrow to the speed of this?
Oh, there was. And I need to say, I want to get back to, we had our Jamaica trip before this wedding. The signs really came out then. As I mentioned a second ago, he was not happy about this trip. And
why do you think he was not happy? What was he expressing? What was she saying that she was getting?
He just said, 2 women don't need to be going down there alone. There's going to be men there. And at that point, I think she told him, honey, there's men everywhere that I go. I mean, I work with men. There's men at the gym. And I mean, I can't get all men I can't help it that there's going to be men there. We're not going to an all-ladies resort. So he just didn't like the idea of that. He thought that we were going to go get wild, and we were just going to, I guess, be like a Girls Gone Wild kind of thing. And I thought, he really doesn't know her, because if he knew her and if he knew me, he'd know that's the last thing that we want. We really don't prefer a lot of people around us. We do like to people watch, but she and I were not big into those crowds and people and conversating. It just wasn't us. We were content to be on the lounge chairs, and it was so funny because they'd have them lined up like they do at resorts, and we would take ours and we'd move them down about 20 feet. We just didn't want to be near nobody, and that's just how we were. Everybody annoyed us. And I'm making us sound horrible, and really we're not, but that's just how we were. So I knew he didn't really know her when he was thinking that we were going to be in the mix of a crowd, because I thought that's the farthest thing that's getting ready to happen.
Well, let's back up a little bit too. That what are we really looking at with a person like that? Because now, when you take individual elements of anything and make observations, they shouldn't form any opinion yet. But now look at this, and I think this is why you said it was one of the first signs, or some people would call this a red flag. Clearly, because of what he's talking about with other men, he has a trust issue with her immediately.
Yeah, and they've only been together 2 months. How
Right.
do you already don't trust a month? How
Right.
do you already don't trust her?
If you look at a fast engagement and a fast planned wedding, because that happened shortly thereafter that, so you've got a trust issue, and then the speed starts to maybe start bleeding some more sense into the idea of control.
It does, and I will tell you, she FaceTimed him and or was on the phone talking and or texting all day long. I'm talking, we wake up in the morning and they're talking. And then she tells him that we're going to get ready to go down for breakfast. And she'll call him when we get down there. And she would call when we got to the table. And then we would eat. And she'd tell him, of course, she would FaceTime him to show him where we're sitting and what our view was. And then she would tell him we're going back to the room to change. And she'll call him when we get back to the room. And then she'll call him when we get down to the beach chairs, because, he had to see that our beach chairs weren't near anybody. And this went on all day and all night, literally play by play of what we're doing all day, all night. I remember because, I'm an avid traveler to Jamaica. It is my favorite ever spot. So I told her that she could get, because she was worried about the phone bill. And I said, you can get an international passport. It's only $10 a day. She got her money's worth, I'll tell you. They were on the phone all day long, FaceTiming or talking or texting, or she's sending him pictures. And this went on the entire time we were there. And I remember one time we were laying there and we had our eyes closed and we're just listening to the water. And I thought she was talking to me. And I said, what'd you say, girl? I didn't hear you. And I look over and she's on the phone. So when she hung up, I said, we are not doing that this whole time we're here. I talked to David in the morning and I talked to him once through the day. And then at night, girl, we're here for us. You were not going to sit on the phone with that man all day long. And so she goes, I know, girl, but I just love him and he loves me back. And I said, well, love him when you get back home. And so that's how it was the whole time. I think the biggest kick in the gut for me the real affirmation came. When we missed our flight home, we were not advised of a change in flight times. So we missed our time. Subsequently, we had to stay overnight again. And he was so upset. He was very livid. I think that's putting it kindly. She wasn't worried about her 3 young children. She had them squared away, and that person was more than happy to keep them for an extra night. Things happen, they said, it's out of your control. Don't worry about it. They're fine. She was so worried about calling him. And he was upset. I could hear him through the phone saying, this is ridiculous. Did you all do this on purpose? And she's like, no, we didn't do it on purpose. What do you mean, did we do it on purpose? That next day when we arrived, we all live in this town together. So they were going to bring me home. If you remember, it was very late. So there's no sense in you coming to get me. So I rode with them. And when they got in the driveway, or when we pulled in, she gets out to let me out of the back seat. And I hug her and I said, I'll talk to you in the morning, because that was our thing. We always talked in the morning. I looked in and kind of bent my head down and looked in the car and I said, I thanked him for driving me. He looked at me and he said, I hope you had a good time, because this will be her last girls' trip with you. And you know what? He was not lying. Hey, there's more to the story, so go download the next episode like the true crime fan that you are.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, which is our website, and it has show notes for imagery and audio and video files related to the cases you're going to hear. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and YouTube, which has closed caption available for those that are hearing impaired. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or wherever you download your podcast from. Subscribe to the Murder Police podcast and set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.